right, hey everybody, welcome back. So I wanted to do a quick video before we record our next session and before we enter Alzheimer to just briefly address something that has been routinely coming up in the questions and I guess the comments rather on the Gameology video that I did, which is probably how you ended up finding this channel in the first place. So I have gotten so many comments that have really been raking me over the coals for being surprised that Freyja is Odin's wife, or at least expressing, some kind of surprise that the game developers would have done it and sort of had that take. And a lot of people are sort of saying that, of course, Freyja is a nickname for Frigg. Freyja is Odin's husband. Isn't she an expert? Why doesn't she know this? So I wanted to just talk about that briefly because it's not as simple as that. So while in the game, Frigg and Freyja may be very obviously the same person, that's not necessarily the case in the mythology. So I wanted to remind you also of a book, and this is the book that I routinely consult as I'm teaching Norse mythology. And this is John Lindau's Guide to Norse Mythology. So I had talked about this in a previous video. So again, for any figure, place, event in Norse mythology, this is sort of your go-to manual. So absolutely suggest checking it out. Also, my friend Jackson Crawford has a number of really excellent videos on Norse mythology, and he's got an amazing channel and just does some amazing stuff. So go over and check him out. But I just wanted to point to a couple of examples from the primary sources that indicate that Freyja and Frigg were not necessarily considered to be one and the same during the time that the myths were written down. The Poetic Edda, which is based on a manuscript of mythological and heroic poetry that was compiled during the early 13th century, and is one of our kind of main sources for our knowledge of what is going on and what we know about Norse mythology, generally speaking, has some poetry that makes it pretty clear that Frigg and Freyja were thought to be distinct from one another. I think one of the most the most obvious examples of this is in a poem called Lokasenna. So in this poem, Loki is really upset with the gods because he has not been invited to a feast at this Jötun Ægir's hall. So Ægir being the personification of the sea. So all of the gods except for Thor are there celebrating, and Loki barges in and he makes Odin give him a place at the table. And then he basically goes and calls out each and every one of the gods and goddesses in turn and insults them in different ways. And he insults Frigg and Freyja separately in this one. So he addresses Frigg first and basically, accuses her of having slept with him, having slept with Odin's brothers as well. And then after she replies, Freyja addresses Loki, and in her response, she defends Frigg and names Frigg. So that's one indication that Frigg and Freyja were not necessarily considered to be one and the same. So it's possible that they were. It's possible that at some point they were, considered to be just, two names for the same goddess. There's a lot of other indications. So Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, in the first section, which is called Gylfaginning, or the deluding of Gylfi, this king comes into a hall where he meets High, just as High, and Third, and it's Odin in disguise, and he answers all these questions about the world because this king has, really wants to know how it is that all of these things are going according to the favor of the Norse gods and goddesses. And this is my cat, I'm sorry. He's going to feature pretty prominently in a lot of videos as well. So we'll just move him out of the way. The section, he goes over all the different gods and then gets to the goddesses. And when he gets to the goddesses, he names first and foremost Frigg. He says Frigg is the foremost. She owns the dwelling called Fensalir, and it is splendid in all ways. And then he names a couple others, minor goddesses, Saga, Eir, Gefjun, Fula, and then he names Freyja and says that Freyja, along with Frigg, is the most noble. And she married the man called Od. And then it says how Od goes traveling on distant paths while Freyja remains behind, where she cries tears of red gold. So Od, Odin, Freyja, Frigg. These are, there's a lot of indications beyond, the names themselves that these may be one and the same. Odin's known throughout the mythology for always being off somewhere, seeking knowledge, or sacrificing himself in some way. And Frigg is constantly telling him to stay home, and he doesn't do it. So there's a lot of indications and a lot of reasons for which a number of scholars have argued that these are perhaps two names for the same goddess. But the long and short of it is not that simple. And that is clear from the primary sources that we have, that even at the time of the mythology being written down, that it's possible that these were thought to be two distinct figures. So just wanted to address that one. And I also wanted to see whether I should be looking out for anything specific as we are entering Alfheimr, and whether there's anything in particular you want me to be looking out for or responding to as we enter that particular realm. And I'm also going to make a separate video shortly that's going to kind of give my general impressions of the game so far and of Kratos and Atreus, as has been requested. And I want to wait until after we have recorded this next segment to do that, because that may, I think that's going to be helpful in, forming my opinion and really interesting ways. So that's drawing from Norse mythology, not just kind of, in the really obvious direct ways, but also in more indirect ways. I'm looking forward to talking to you more about that. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time. Okay, bye.